range from discrimination to inability to pay or difficulty getting to services. Health inequities are differences in health that are unfair, preventable, and fixable. We must ensure that everyone has what they need to lead healthy lives. This means removing obstacles to good health for all people, no matter what their age, education, ethnicity, sex, gender, geographic location, or financial situation. It means not only ensuring fair access to health services, but that people also have healthy food, education, a clean environment, a safe place to live, and decent working conditions. It also means tackling sexism, racism, and classism, including in the way we set up our laws and policies and health and social services. WHO is working with countries and partners to measure inequalities and address inequities in health. Health is a human right, not a privilege. It's time to build a fairer, healthier world for everyone, everywhere.
Around the world, people are living longer, but often with multiple diseases and conditions that require care over many years. And unfortunately, too many people are not informed or consulted in the care they receive. In some countries, only 1 in 3 people have the risks of their treatment explained to them. 1 in 5 people have at least one unnecessary test. And up to 40% of health spending is wasted due to inefficiency. Healthcare should not be like this. Remember, people live with their condition 24/7, not only when they seek care. That's why people-centered care is so important. People-centered care means ensuring that health services are tailored to people's needs and are provided in partnership with them rather than simply given to them. It means care where people, families, and communities are respected, informed, engaged, supported, and treated with dignity and compassion. People-centered care can have lasting benefits. It improves the trust, experience, and outcomes people have from care, the confidence and job satisfaction of health professionals, and the quality and efficiency of health systems. People-centered care can increase access to health services and reduce unnecessary use of services. Ultimately, it means people get the right care at the right time and in the right place. But too often, this type of care is not standard practice. Implementing people-centered care requires fundamental changes in our approach to healthcare. It means rethinking how health services are organized, managed, and delivered. It means shifting away from asking, "What is the matter with you?" to "What matters to you?" Around the World Health Organization is working with countries to design health systems that put people and their needs at the center of care. Because that's the health care that everyone deserves.
Health is shaped by the actions and behaviours of individuals and communities. Individuals, health workers, policymakers, and government leaders make decisions every day which affect people's health. Strategic communication is a field of technical expertise which can help to shape these decisions. Communication can influence whether somebody takes up or quits smoking. Communication can help a parent decide to get their child vaccinated. Communication can be a key determinant of the health and well-being of women in a remote community. Communication that understands the audience, the drivers of their behaviour, and communication which is understandable, accessible, credible, relevant, actionable, and timely can improve awareness, shift attitudes, change policies and behaviour, ultimately contributing to better health. The digital age has profoundly changed the way people engage with each other and the world. The majority of people in most countries now get their news from the internet and social media, rather than traditional news channels. Many have easy access to information and advice from online peer groups and influencers. Information and misinformation is shared and received at unprecedented speed. The pace of information flow, the rise of online influencers, and declining trust in governments and institutions presents both challenges and opportunities for WHO and member states in the Western Pacific region. At the same time, the evidence base for effective communications is expanding. Governments, civil society, and the private sector are increasingly using behavioural insights, data collection, and evaluation to make smarter investments in communications that lead to demonstrable health improvements. This changed landscape demands that we, WHO and our member states, also change how we communicate. Communicating more strategically requires moving away from a focus on outputs, products, and activities, and towards a focus on the outcomes and impact of communication. We need to focus more on communication which targets a particular audience for a specific purpose and responds to real barriers or gaps in understanding or behaviour to contribute to a specific change. Targeted, evidence-based, measurable, and impact-driven. These are the principles at the heart of what we call Communication for Health, or C4H. By working together to scale up C4H, we can help make the Western Pacific region the healthiest and safest region in the world.
We live in a world where undernutrition and obesity can exist side by side in the same country, home, or even person. Foods high in sugars, salt, and/or unhealthy fats are leading to unhealthy diets and are one reason why children may not be growing healthily, while causing other people to develop overweight or obesity. The consumption of unhealthy diets is heavily influenced by marketing. Easy access is fueling this new nutrition reality, but thankfully, change towards a healthier future is possible. By having a sustainable healthy diet made up of a variety of foods that are safe for consumption, we can promote health and have better abilities to fight illness. How do we do this? Good nutrition for women during pregnancy and for children in their first 1,000 days of life, including breastfeeding, sets them up for healthy adulthood and future generations. We should eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, pulses, nuts and seeds, and less sugary drinks and foods high in sugars, salt and unhealthy fats. The less of these foods we buy, the more the food industry will be encouraged to produce foods that contribute to healthy diets. We can also call on our leaders to make the right decisions so that every person, everywhere, can afford and access good nutrition. When people like you and me, industries and governments work together to make positive changes, we can create a healthier world.
Populations in the Western Pacific region are aging rapidly. More than 240 million people aged 65 and over live in our region. And this number is predicted to double by 2050. Population aging has implications for societies, including a shifting burden from communicable to non-communicable diseases. But aging also brings opportunities for individuals and societies. With early investment and coordination across sectors, countries can reduce healthcare costs and enable older people to participate in and contribute to societies. WHO's proposed regional action plan on healthy aging guides countries to promote a healthy, older population by transforming society and health systems, providing community-based integrated care, encouraging innovation, and strengthening monitoring, surveillance, and research. Let's act now for significant health, social, and economic returns.
Air pollution is the biggest environmental risk to health.
The air is so polluted that it's darkening the sky, leaving homes and their occupants cloaked in smog,
leading to heart, brain, and lung disease, including cancer.
Of the 7 million deaths due to air pollution each year, 1/3, or 2.2 million, occur in the WHO Western Pacific region. Women, children, and older people are particularly vulnerable. When polluted air is inhaled, Microscopic particles penetrate deep into the lungs, heart and blood vessels and increase the risk of death from heart disease, stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and lung cancer. Air pollution comes from homes, transportation, industry, coal power plants, solid waste burning and the use of fire to clear land for agriculture. Burning of solid fuels like wood, coal or dung at home for cooking, heating and light causes indoor air pollution. Vehicles emit harmful exhaust, particularly in large cities. Factories, oil refineries and coal power plants release a lot of dangerous dust and gas into the air. Solid waste burning and agricultural burning emit health-damaging smoke that can spread between communities and across borders. Air pollution is an emerging public health crisis in our region. The World Health Organization supports governments in tackling the root causes of air pollution. Winning actions to reduce air pollution include more investment in renewable energy and low-emission power generation, clean waste and agricultural management, green, safe and healthy cities with energy-efficient buildings, safe and affordable public transport systems using clean fuel or electric power, and pedestrian and cycle-friendly roads, urban planning for more green space, clean fuels for cooking, heating and lighting at home. Air pollution threatens our health, our climate and our very existence.
But this is the issue. Without involving other sectors, we can't really effectively address. We have to come together and to think how we can influence other sector who has solutions on these issues. We call it change agent.
Stronger leadership and bolder actions by governments are crucial in tackling this public health emergency. It's time to accelerate action to combat air pollution.
Health is shaped by the actions and behaviours of individuals and communities. Individuals, health workers, policymakers and government leaders make decisions every day which affect people's health. Strategic communication is a field of technical expertise which can help to shape these decisions. Communication can influence whether somebody takes up or quits smoking. Communication can help a parent decide to get their child vaccinated. Communication can be a key determinant of the health and well-being of women in a remote community. Communication that understands the audience, the drivers of their behaviour, and communication which is understandable, accessible, credible, relevant, actionable, and timely can improve awareness, shift attitudes, change policies and behaviour, ultimately contributing to better health. The digital age has profoundly changed the way people engage with each other and the world. The majority of people in most countries now get their news from the internet and social media, rather than traditional news channels. Many have easy access to information and advice from online peer groups and influencers. Information and misinformation is shared and received at unprecedented speed. The pace of information flow, the rise of online influencers, and declining trust in governments and institutions presents both challenges and opportunities for WHO and member states in the Western Pacific region. At the same time, the evidence base for effective communications is expanding. Governments, civil society, and the private sector are increasingly using behavioural insights, data collection, and evaluation to make smarter investments in communications that lead to demonstrable health improvements. This changed landscape demands that we, WHO, and our member states also change how we communicate. Communicating more strategically requires moving away from a focus on outputs, products, and activities, and towards a focus on the outcomes and impact of communication. We need to focus more on communication which targets a particular audience for a specific purpose and responds to real barriers or gaps in understanding or behaviour to contribute to a specific change. Targeted, evidence-based, measurable, and impact-driven. These are the principles at the heart of what we call Communication for Health, or C for H. By working together to scale up C for H, we can help make the Western Pacific region the healthiest and safest region in the world.
Mabuhay! Welcome to this webinar series on cervical cancer with the theme A Paradigm Shift in Cervical Cancer Treatment and Route to Elimination. Let's meet our host for today. Maria Stella Osorio is the Technical Coordinator of the World Health Organization Philippines for Cancer Control. She provides technical support to the Department of Health Cancer Control Division in projects and activities related to the operationalization of the National Integrated Cancer Control Act, or NICA. Her research interests are on pharmaceutical healthcare system, mental health, disaster risk reduction and management in health, antimicrobial resistance, and cancer control. Her position at the Department of Health significantly led to the development of the implementing rules and regulations of the Republic Act No. 11036, the Mental Health Act, in 2019. We are very privileged that she has graced us with her presence. So please join me as we welcome Ms. Stella Osorio.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Stella. We welcome you to the DOH-WHO Cervical Cancer Webinar Series with the theme, A Paradigm Shift in Cervical Cancer Care en Route to Elimination. We are so glad to have you here today for this insightful two-day webinar. We assure you this event will greatly contribute to your better understanding of cervical cancer and the advances towards elimination. Before we officially start, let's mark ourselves in the presence of our God for our opening prayer, to be followed by our Philippine National Anthem.
Dear God, we acknowledge you as the giver of life, and we are grateful for the gift of life that you have given us. With gratitude, we want to be good stewards of this precious gift. Guide us in the Cervical Cancer Awareness Webinar, that we may be able to reach out to as many medical practitioners, decision makers, and women as we can. Bless our speakers, our guests, and participants with the wisdom and understanding on how we can put into practice all the knowledge we will be learning from this event. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Alam ng puso, sa titik mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyan ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi.
Hi again, everyone. We are officially starting the webinar. To all our listeners, most especially our women listeners who are non health workers, have you asked, what is cervical cancer? Cervical cancer is caused by human papillomavirus or HPV, a very common group of viruses which have no symptoms but are easy to detect. It affects the skin in the mouth, throat, and or genital area. Two high-risk HPV strains, 16 and 18, cause more than 70% of cervical cancers and can be treated if detected early. Concurrent with national vaccination of girls against HPV, the recent published WHO guideline for screening and treatment of cervical cancer, pre-cancer lesions, or cervical cancer prevention recommends the use of DNA-based HPV testing as a first-choice screening method. It is considered to be less prone to quality problems, particularly in low and middle-income countries. WHO recommends that countries ensure regular DNA-based testing for HPV to identify women who have or at risk of cervical precancer. A shift in care. The guidelines include some important shifts in cost-effective approaches to cervical cancer screening. In particular, it recommends an HPV DNA-based test as a preferred method rather than a visual inspection with acetic acid or VIA or even pap smear. Currently are the most commonly used method globally to detect pre-cancer lesions. Also this April, convening of the WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization evaluated that evidence has been emerging over past years that single-dose schedules provide comparable efficacy to the 2 or 3 dose regimens. These innovations could be game changers for the prevention of the disease. Often referred to as a silent killer and almost entirely preventable, cervical cancer is a disease of inequity of access. We have a lot of things in store for all of us today and tomorrow, so please stay with us. The webinar is also a key strategy underpinning the mandate of the Republic Act 11215, also known as the National Integrated Cancer Control Act, to intensify awareness in cancer and the observance of cancer-related advocacies. We are, by the way, streaming live on Zoom and StreamYard and airing live as well on the DOH WHO Cervical Cancer Webinar Series Facebook page and the Healthy Filipinas page. So feel free to interact with us, post your questions, and of course, join our fun quiz later. Now to give our opening remarks, please help me welcome Dr. Rizel Nika Hao, Director 4 from the Disease Prevention and Control Bureau of the Department of Health.
Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today for this 2-day webinar series as we raise all of our efforts and stand strong in our fight against cervical cancer. In the Philippines, cervical cancer ranks as the most frequent cancer among women and the second most frequent cancer in women between 15 and 44 years of age. It is also among the most preventable and most treatable forms of cancer if detected early and managed effectively. This webinar, prepared in partnership by the Department of Health and the World Health Organization, aims to explain these cervical cancer control strategies in the Philippines, specifically as it aspires to create more awareness to achieve the 90-70-90 cervical cancer elimination targets by 2030 and to explain the value of HPV DNA-based testing as among primary screening modalities for cervical cancer. These interventions are consistent with the integrated approach to comprehensive life stage and settings-based assurance of quality, access, and equity for primary care services as envisioned in the Universal Healthcare Law. This to be used across the model of care framework from screening, detection, diagnosis, treatment, supportive care, and up to end-of-life care. Our main strategies are always on vaccination, early detection through screening, and effectively treating those with positive tests through advanced technology. Allow me to welcome all the distinguished speakers and guests across the country who have come here virtually to share their knowledge and experience with us. And let me also welcome everyone joining us via DOH and Healthy Filipinas Facebook page and YouTube. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our medical societies, implementers, partners, allied health professionals, and advocate groups, of course with the World Health Organization, for all of the support in spreading awareness on cervical cancer strategies through extensive information dissemination and health education campaigns. We also want to thank the JAPEGO Philippines for launching the Scale Up Cervical Cancer Elimination with Secondary Prevention Strategy or SUCCESS project here in the country, which has built a strong foundation to facilitate the introduction of new and accessible technologies using the model of cervical cancer. We hope that the session today will be an interesting and fruitful one for you. May you learn a lot from this webinar series, and we look forward to our continuous partnership with all of you to ensure the health and well-being of all ones and onas. Once again, thank you for all of your contribution, and we look forward to working with all of you together towards building a healthy Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Dr. Rizel Nikahao. This afternoon, we have invited also speakers who are all experts in their fields to impart their knowledge about cervical cancer in the Philippines and globally. We will also have panelists who will be sharing innovations, best practices, and challenges on their own respective countries with regard to cervical cancer. So make sure to write down your questions on a sheet of paper, as we will be having a Q&A portion later. So without further ado, I would like to call on our first speaker, Dr. Andre Ilbawi, Technical Officer of the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. He is a clinical specialist and a surgical oncologist in Anderson Cancer Center. And Dr. Ilbawi will be discussing the WHO Cervical Cancer Elimination Initiative and achieving the 90-70-90 targets.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to begin by congratulating the Department of Health and the WHO Country Office for hosting this important dialogue on the elimination of cervical cancer. Indeed, today is a very exciting day. Political leadership linked to community engagement have been the bedrock of success for the elimination of cervical cancer. In this regard, the government of the Philippines and her people have been so successful because cervical cancer elimination is perhaps one of the most exciting areas in the public health agenda as it pertains to cancer. It is the first and only cancer we have the opportunity to eliminate, and we have the responsibility to do so. So let's begin with these two questions. Why cervical cancer and why elimination? Well, to begin, cervical cancer simply because we can. It is one of the only cancers that is nearly fully preventable. This compares with other cancers like breast cancer, which is only 20 or 30% preventable, or lung cancer, which is 80% or perhaps more. But with cervical cancer, we have fundamentally the opportunity to prevent and or to eliminate it. This is also true for treatment. In fact, cervical cancer can be also treated effectively with survival probabilities that can exceed 70%. And also, very importantly, why cervical cancer? Because when women go untreated and the disease advances, death from cervical cancer is extremely difficult, with discharge, bleeding, and discomfort. In fact, it is an imperative to care for these women in all stages of life, particularly when cancer is advanced. Now, why must we? Because cervical cancer perhaps reflects one of the most profound inequalities that exist in the cancer agenda. The burden is highest amongst the most vulnerable populations, low and middle income countries, women from lower socioeconomic groups. And also because we have the instruments. This is not a broad ambition that may take 30 or 40 years to find the right tools. We know they exist. Vaccination, screening, treatment, and manage. This is achievable. and we have the opportunity to do so. Let's start with some simple numbers that we all are familiar with. The cervical cancer burden impacts nearly 500,000 women each year. The number of deaths is about 340,000. But again, when we look at how this burden is distributed, we see that the vast majority of women from low and middle income countries are the ones affected. In fact, more than 90% of the burden are in low and middle income economies. In the Philippines, there's also a significant burden. Rated against other countries in Southeast Asia, the Philippines ranks in the middle region, affecting nearly 50,000 new cases each year. Importantly, the age standardized incidence rate is 15. This is a number we remember as we look forward to discuss the target for cervical cancer elimination shortly. And what about death? We know again that cervical cancer affects women in the prime of their life. When we rank cancers that impact women and men between the ages of 30 to 69, cervical cancer is number 1 or number 2 in many countries. Again, looking at the Philippines, it is the second leading cause of premature death among women. Recognizing again that we can do something about this. In 2018, the Director General of the World Health Organization made a very profound comment and recognition. 1 woman dies of cervical cancer every 2 minutes. Each one is a tragedy, and we can prevent it. Prevent it indeed. And it's with this vision that the Director General called on member states to take up cervical cancer elimination as a priority. It has been a journey. It started now about 4 years ago when the Director General made this announcement and invited governments to commit to eliminate cervical cancer. The next year, governments endorsed this vision and asked the WHO to develop a global strategy. This global strategy was endorsed by member states in a very positive World Health Assembly in which more than 90 governments spoke positively about the importance of cervical cancer elimination. From there, implementation has begun. We know this is going to be a journey. There are targets for 2030, and there are targets for us to achieve in the immediate futures thereafter. Now, how are we going to do it? Well, we know that regional action is important, and just in the past months, we've seen many regional offices, including in the WHO region of the Western Pacific, take up regional action plans as a priority for implementation. If we stop and look at the history, we recognize a lot happened in those first 2 years. This is when all the discussions on the technical foundation for the elimination strategy had started. Let's unpack how it transpired. It began again with the recognition that we can eliminate cervical cancer. But we had to ask the question of what is the threshold? Because this being the first cancer to eliminate, we also had the responsibility to define what is a cancer that had been eliminated. Would it make it a rare cancer? Would it hit a certain threshold that we've seen for infectious diseases? After much deliberation and an evaluation of the scientific foundation, we recognized that the threshold should be 4 per 100,000 women. To truly eliminate cervical cancer in a population, that age standardized incidence rate would have to be less than 4. The next step was to figure out how do we get there, because this is the ultimate target. So intermediate targets were identified to help countries get on the road to reach that age standardized incidence rate. It is now explained as the well-known 90, 70, 90, the pillars of which we will be discussing throughout this 2-day workshop. But it's important to recognize also one of the justifications for this ultimate target and the 2030 target was that it can contribute significantly to the Sustainable Development Goals and the commitment that governments have made to reach that target. So, why the 3 pillars? We know, and there is a significant recognition, that vaccines are the foundation of cervical cancer elimination. In the next century, 45 million cases and deaths could be averted through vaccine alone. And this is an important bedrock for the elimination strategy. But there is in fact more. If we add on screening to the simple public health intervention of vaccination, we can see, in fact, we can save an additional number of lives, 14 million lives in the next century. And beyond that, we can reach the target of cervical cancer elimination even faster. because screening for cervical cancer, in fact, both reduces the number of cancer cases and the number of cancer deaths, one of the unique characteristics of cervical cancer screening. So, bedrock 1, vaccination linked to screening will allow us to achieve cervical cancer elimination faster and with greater population impact. What about the third pillar? Where does treatment and palliation fit? Well, in fact, if we again look at the next 100-year time horizon, we see that cervical cancer elimination, and including the third pillar, can have a major benefit. That benefit is as much as 500,000 lives that can be saved in the next 2 decades alone. So this is the foundation of cervical cancer elimination. All 3 pillars of equal merit and targets that have been set, 90, 70, 90. Now, what are the actions? As many of you know, in the global strategy, some priority activities were laid out. Each pillar has their own priority actions. But what's important to know, again, is that there are cross-cutting foundations that justify the 90-70-90 target. These are actions that are true for all 3 pillars, such as affordability, accessibility, communication, stakeholder engagement. So while we see the initiative through its 3 pillars, in fact, there's a set of actions that are relevant across all 3. The first question that we now ask is, how are we doing? If we take a country like the Philippines on the 90-70-90 target, how are we progressing towards 2030? Well, the situation is, of course, a challenge. This is not unique to the Philippines. Most countries have numbers very similar to this. Vaccination rates that are 10% or less, screening rates that are 10% or less, treatment that has also been a major challenge in the past years. But in many regards, the Philippines should be acknowledged for its success, because while we see here in the graph that mortality has been stagnant, in fact, what we also see, as this has been reported in the country profile for the Philippines in cervical cancer elimination, most of the foundational ingredients are in place. So in that regard, again, the Department of Health, the community, WHO country office, and other key stakeholders should be congratulated, because this is the foundation of success. While we have not yet reached the target, the proper decisions on vaccine availability, on screening programs and investments, on treatment infrastructure, those ingredients are in place. Now, how can we in fact get to that 90-70-90? It always starts with the discussion of what are the key bottlenecks. Here, to acknowledge some work that was done in the Eastern Mediterranean region, we see that one of the key responses in stakeholder informant dialogues was that the barrier is it's not seen as a high priority. But what was interesting when we explore this further is that it's not necessarily seen as a priority by the group we in fact expect for it to be owned the most. So when we ask who has supported it, many countries have the political support in place. Many of them have the stakeholder support in place. It's the public engagement that has been suffering. So how do we in fact build that public engagement so that we can reach the targets that have been specified? As a broad concept, let's recognize that there is major innovation in cervical cancer, and how do we leverage that innovation both through communities and through social engagement to achieve those targets? To begin, we also have to recognize that cervical cancer is a very fluid field. The science is evolving constantly, and in many regards for the better. As an example, many of you know that the HPV vaccine was originally approved in this WHO report now from over 5 years ago. That recommendation was made that everyone should receive 2 or 3 doses of HPV vaccines, and at the time, the market had been populated by 2 or 3 key manufacturers. Now things have changed. In fact, just in the past month alone, WHO released a new report based on the recommendation from the SAGE committee. It said a single dose schedule should be considered. This is in fact revolutionary. And the reason it's so important is because it will help us address some of the major market barriers that we knew existed as it pertains particularly to supply. And it will also help us with delivery mechanisms. Should HPV vaccine be delivered in schools, in facilities, or in both? So these are the types of innovations that are happening daily in cervical cancer. And if we leverage it at the right time and in the right way, we can in fact accelerate progress towards the elimination of cervical cancer. Just to note, the same is true in cervical cancer screening. There were guidelines that were almost a decade old, and just in the past year, these guidelines have been updated with a shift towards high-performance alternate tests for screening of cervical cancer, focusing on HPV, DNA, or mRNA testing. That increase the efficiency, that will increase the accessibility, and that will also offer completion of therapy in a way that enables women to finish a screening activity, not only to be screened and or to be triaged, but also to receive the treatment. So these are the types of innovations that we think about. What are the new tools? What are the new tests that we can bring to bear? These are the general category of technological innovation. At the same time, we want to shift towards social and organizational innovations. What are the new ways that we can provide screening services closer to the population? Self-sampling, as an example. These are the types of investments that will help us reach the target, because it gives us a new way of working, a new way of thinking that is community-driven and engages the public so that we do receive their support through public ownership, through community ownership. These are the foundations that will help us reach the target that we've specified. An important message is to also say that it's not to be done alone. No woman should suffer alone. No community stakeholder should be working in isolation, because there's an entire ecosystem of partners, stakeholders who are ready, willing, and able to support a community, a government, and a broader network of engaged and committed people to reach the target. This is true within the UN, within UN-linked partners like Gavi, and this is also true for external stakeholders that are willing to invest more time, resources, commitment to help us reach the target. You can see some of the stakeholders and activities that are listed here. Together we can and we will reach this target. The sooner we do, the more lives that we will save. Important message is, no woman is alone. The community is there to support them. Girls should be supported through vaccination programs. Women who are diagnosed should be supported in their journey to receive access to diagnosis, treatment, and palliation. And we at WHO, working with our UN partners, are with you to achieve this target. And you in the region have also taken leadership. Just again in the past month, we know that a regional action plan has been specified. A draft strategic framework is in circulation. This is also a major step, because countries and governments can do this together. We can increase access, we can share best practices, we can support regional training programs if, again, we take this on as a public health priority and make the commitments that are needed to deliver on it. But it starts again with the recognition at the center of this all are women and their families. Because when we ignore health, when women suffer diseases that are preventable like cervical cancer, that has a broader impact on society and on economies. When deaths can be avoided, we ultimately see that premature deaths lead to a loss of income potential, financial hardship becomes common. As you can see here on the table on the left, many people diagnosed with cancer, including cervical cancer, suffer financial hardship. They sell assets, they have to sell their homes, they lose opportunities to provide for their families simply because they have to pay for treatment for what otherwise would have been a preventable disease or one that could be detected early and treated effectively. And that's not alone. When the disease gets advanced, we see these very concerning outcomes. Women with metastatic cervical cancer are abandoned by their families or by their intimate partners. This is really the ethical and moral call for us as a community. This is a disease we can manage and prevent if we take it on. This has broader economic impacts and, of course, on societies. We can reverse this with investments to be made today. We don't have the luxury of time because deaths are happening each day that can be prevented or avoided. We have the tools, we have the partners, we have the networks. So, in conclusion, a few points for consideration as you go into these important two-day dialogue. First, what types of new ways of working? Not thinking about new products, but thinking about organizational or social innovations are needed to get care to the women who need them most, to get vaccines to girls, and to do so without any further delay. What types of new ways of working can we bring and also share within the community? Second, focus on implementation. Yes, Pilot projects are of great interest, but how do we invest in implementation projects and take them to scale in a very short period of time? We don't have luxury. Already, the cervical cancer elimination horizon is something we want to see within the lifetime of our children. But if we wait much longer, we will not have that luxury. What are the implementation priorities? How do we orient them towards action? Third, we have the instruments, we have the tools, and in the region, you have the solidarity through an action plan to bring this forward. How can this regional action plan offer opportunities for shared investments, for training, for monitoring of impact? This is a unique opportunity in the Western Pacific, and the Philippines, again, can take a leading role in the regional call to action. And finally, to say thank you. All initiatives began because of the belief by a core set of stakeholders that we can make a difference. That is what this workshop is about. That is why we all stand together in solidarity for women affected by cervical cancer, so we in fact can radically transform this disease. And so that in fact we can say over and over again, we have supported the elimination of cervical cancer as a public health problem, and we will do so together. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to the dialogue that will emerge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Andre Ilbawi, and for your unending, overwhelming support to the Philippines. I am sure that everyone is as excited as I am upon learning about the 90-70-90 targets. So we will now be checking if everyone here really listened to what Dr. Ilbawi just discussed by having a knowledge check or sort of a quiz. And of course, we'll be giving out some fun, healthy prizes. Our fun prizes will run throughout the whole program, so you can type in your answer. So the first viewer with the correct answer will be the winner. So here's our first fun question. Are you guys ready? Okay, so what does 90-70-90 stand for? Winners will be announced at the end of the program. From the talk of Dr. Andre Ilbawi on the Cervical Cancer Elimination Initiative and achieving the 90-70-90 targets, we will now move to the experience of Australia. Professor Karen Canfell is the director of Daffodil Center at the University of Sydney in Australia. She will be sharing the strategies on the paradigm shift to high-performing HPV DNA test, citing sentinel experiences with the Australian model. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Karen Canfell.
My name is Karen Canfell. I'm Director of the Daffodil Centre at Cancer Council, New South Wales and the University of Sydney, and it's a real pleasure to be here today to talk about global modelling for transfer of screening programs to HPV testing. I just want to disclose that I'm co-PI of two investigator-initiated projects, one called COMPASS and one called Elimination of Cervical Cancer Pacific, and they've received support as shown on this slide. So you've heard about the WHO Strategic Plan for Cervical Cancer Elimination, and this started back in 2018 when Dr. Tedros, the WHO Director General, called for all countries to take action to help end the suffering caused by cervical cancer. And this resulted over the next few years in the development of the global strategy to accelerate the elimination of cervical cancer as a public health problem. And of course, this has really resulted in the development and articulation of the three pillars of cervical cancer control, defined as 2030 targets for the next decade across three sets of proven interventions. The first is prophylactic vaccination, and the target is that 90% of girls will be fully vaccinated by age 15. The second pillar is screening. 70% of women will be HPV screened at least twice in a lifetime around the ages of 35 and 45, and potentially more often. And then finally, 90% of women that require treatment, either for cervical precancer or cancer, will be treated. And this will set countries up to achieve over the very long term a cervical cancer threshold, a cervical cancer rate under 4 cases per 100,000 women per annum, a rate so low that it would be considered to be controlled. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit in a little bit more detail today about the second pillar, which is primary HPV screening, followed by pre-cancer treatment. Now, we'll get to the WHO 2021 cervical screening guidelines in a minute, but in the meantime, I wanted to just present some of the core evidence on the effectiveness of HPV screening. So this is a result from a fairly recent Cochrane review. This is a 2017 Cochrane review on the cross-sectional sensitivity and specificity of HPV screening versus pap smear or cytology screening. And you see here the key result that HPV screening has a 90% sensitivity for high-grade CIN or high-grade precancer compared to, in the best case, around 73% for the pap smear. And that is very much the best case in the quality-controlled environment, achieved usually only in high-income countries with much infrastructure and support. On the specificity side, we do see that HPV screening does have a slightly lower specificity than pap smears, and that's essentially because it picks up any HPV infection or many HPV infections, not all of which will lead to a high-grade precancer. And that's one of the reasons why some of the algorithms for HPV screening involve a triaging of HPV positives before they're referred or treated. Longitudinally, HPV performs as an effective risk stratifier. So here's some data from pooled European trials. This is published more than a decade ago, about 15 years ago, in fact, by Joachim Dillner and colleagues. And this shows what happens after an HPV test versus a cytology test in the case where a woman is screen negative. So you can see the blue line is cytology or pap smear negative, and you can see that after about 3 years, which is the routine screening interval in many cytology-based programs, the risk of developing a CIN3+, the most serious grade of precancer, is about 0.5%. Whereas in an HPV negative women, you can go out to 5 years and still have much lower risk in this cohort. And this is consistent and duplicated around the world. And so you go out to 5 years and the woman still has increased protection against developing CIN3+. And that's the basis for the safety of HPV-based screening, that a woman who's HPV negative is at very, very low risk for at least 5 years and up to 10 years for older women, in fact. Conversely, if a woman is HPV positive, that says something about her risk as well. And you're able to use HPV effectively to predict future risk, not just current risk of precancer. This is from a very old cohort now, 2005, but this result has been duplicated many, many times since in many, many different cohorts and trials around the world. And this shows the risk of developing CIN3+, the most serious grade of precancer or cancer, depending on a woman's baseline HPV status. So you can see if a woman was HPV 16 or 18 at baseline, her risk of developing CIN3 her cumulative incidence is almost 15% over the next 10 or so years. Whereas if she has another type of HPV, it's intermediate risk, a much lower risk, about 3% in this particular cohort. And if she's HPV negative, a very low risk again, even at 10 years, as I said earlier. And so this is the basis for a traffic light system. We can start to really classify women in terms of their future, not just their current risk of developing cervical precancer. And finally, some of the most compelling evidence of all comes from the pooled data from 4 European trials. This is about 160,000 women. And the short story here is that in women who were randomized to HPV versus cytology screening, or in women who tested negative on the right for both tests, you can see that the risks are much lower over time. And this is now for invasive cancer. So in fact, in women who had a negative screening test, the risk of developing invasive cervical cancer is about 70% lower for HPV screened women who test negative versus cytology screened women who test negative. So that's a stunning result and really shows this long-term protection against invasive cancer through HPV screening. Now I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about our experience in Australia, which is a a bit of a case study for elimination, and we've been on a journey now for many years in Australia. The National HPV Vaccination Program was introduced in 2007, and we have, as a result, changed the screening program and moved to HPV screening. So this is some modelling that we did of the vaccine impact in Australia. This is a model prevalence of vaccine included type HPV-16, the type responsible for about half of invasive cervical cancers. And this is back in 2006. You can see this high rate of infection in young adolescents, young women, plateauing in older women. And the simulation shows you what happened when the vaccine program was rolled out. You can see this rapid fall in HPV prevalence in younger women. And if you like, this flatlining that occurs very quickly, that occurred very quickly, and that we've now seen borne out by the real world data in Australia. And on the right here, I'll now show you the actual real world data in 2016. And this shows this flatlining of effects. Sorry, that's 2017, I believe. So you can see this quite impressive and profound impact of vaccination, which by itself, in fact, has been a prompt to change. So 15 years after the introduction of the National HPV Vaccination Program, because this was actually done initially as a catch-up up to age 26 in women between 2007 and 2009, those cohorts have now aged, they're now aged up to 40 years or younger. So all women in that age group have been offered HPV vaccination in Australia. Vaccination was one of the main reasons that Australia essentially became an early adopter of HPV screening. The screening program was designed to fit together with the HPV vaccination program. And 5 years ago now, in 2017, we transitioned from 2 yearly cytology screening, starting at age 18 to 20, 26 tests over a lifetime recommended, to 5 yearly HPV screening, recommending 5 yearly screening with only 9 to 10 tests in a lifetime. And this slide just shows a schematic of the renewed pathway for the new HPV-based screening program as it was introduced in 2017. And without going into the details, the main issue to take on board here is that because we're using HPV screening, we're able to use this traffic light system. So in the green on the left, you can see what to do if HPV is not detected. We have routine 5-yearly screening. On the right, with the red, HPV 16 and 18 detected, and those women are referred directly to colposcopy for review and evaluation. In the middle, we have HPV detected but not 16-18. It's another oncogenic type. And in those women, there's reflex cytology or liquid-based cytology done in the laboratory, and then the recommendation is made based on the result. So we did some modelling of the long-term outcomes from switching from cytology-based to HPV-based screening. And this slide shows the summary of the results. But essentially, by switching to HPV screening, even in a country with a well-controlled cytological screening program, well quality assured, etc., we showed that further reductions in cervical cancer incidence and mortality of around 29 to 36% would be conceivable, and that this would also save costs because of the longer screening interval. So the combination of HPV vaccination and particularly the switch to HPV-based cervical screening has been really what's positioned Australia to eliminate cervical cancer. And we have shown that Australia is actually on track to be the first country in the world to achieve this. So this is a model simulation from 2015 to the end of a century in Australia. And you can see in this simulation that the rates are expected to drop below the 4 per 100,000 threshold as early as 2028 and somewhere in the range of 2028 to 2035. And so it's been a major discussion and point of discussion in Australia about whether we can accelerate this. And one of the great pieces of news, in fact, just announced last week, is that Australia will introduce HPV-based universal self-collection. So a woman can elect to take her own sample for HPV-based screening. And we hope that this will enable new models of delivery for cervical screening and increase uptake in the screening program even further, and particularly to do so in high-risk groups, thus increasing equity of screening uptake and hence equity of achieving elimination across different groups. So what's next for us? Well, Australia is currently developing a national plan for elimination of cervical cancer, which has equity as the focus and is currently a large-scale process of stakeholder engagement and consultation going on towards that. And we hope to launch this plan. It's hoped and expected the plan will launch in the first quarter of 2023. So I now want to move back from the example of Australia to considering the global 90-70-90 elimination targets. And to finish, tell you briefly how these were established. They were established using a modelling framework, and our team at the Daffodil Centre, working with our colleagues at WHO and two other modelling teams based at Harvard University in the US and Laval University in Canada, provided estimates to support the 90-70-90 targets. So the simulation on this slide now shows us the findings from the WHO Cervical Cancer Elimination Modelling Consortium for cervical cancer rates across 78 low and middle income countries. And the starting point is the year 2020 noted on the top left. And you can see the red, most countries have rates which are color-coded red, which means very high cervical cancer rates currently of well over 15 or 20 cervical cancers per 100,000 women per annum. And as we run the simulation, you'll see how this is expected to change over time if countries can scale up to the 90-70-90 targets. So we're running the simulation. You can see the year ticking over at the top left, and you see the rates drop to pale blue, which is rates less than 10 per 100,000 women, and then to navy blue, less than 4 per 100,000 women. And the key point here is that every single country, even LMICs, can eliminate cervical cancer over the course of a century, and that's what the simulation shows. So what does this actually mean in terms of cervical cancer death? Well, in fact, the good news is that although it might take many decades to reach elimination in some countries, this actually has profound implications for lives that can be saved even in the shorter term. Now, this is rates of cervical cancer mortality, age standardized rates, and this is under 5 different scenarios that we modeled. The one I'd like to draw your attention to is in purple, and this is the elimination strategy. This is the 90-70-90 targets. And you can see in this situation a really rapid drop in rates of cervical cancer mortality, in fact, of 1/3 by 2030. And it's worth noting that that is in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's achieved mostly by increased access to cancer treatment services in that time. In the next 50 years, a 92% drop, and that's really around increased access to cancer treatment services, but also screen and treat. And then over the long term, the vaccination of young cohorts will really kick in and protect older and mid-adult women against cervical cancer, resulting in a long-term 99% reduction in cervical cancer mortality. So what are the corresponding number of lives that are saved? Well, I showed you rates before, but this is actually lives saved across 78 LMIC. And again, if I draw your attention to the purple in relation to the grey line, which is the status quo or do no more. If we can scale up to the 90, 70, 90 targets, we expect actually to be able to save 300,000 lives across LMICs by 2030. 14.6 million lives in the next 50 years by 2070, and over 62 million lives over the course of the century. This is also very cost effective. So we found that for 95% of countries, scale up to the 90, 70, 90 targets will not only result in elimination over the long term, but it will also be cost effective in the short, intermediate and long term. So an estimated $3.20 US will be returned to the economy for every dollar invested through 2050 and beyond, owing to increases in women's workforce participation. And the return on investment rises actually to about $26 US when the benefits of women's improved health on families, communities and societies are also considered. So in order to support this mass recommended scale up of HPV-based cervical screening, in 2021, WHO revised its cervical screening guidelines. And for full details, you can see the guidelines at the link on the screen here. But these guidelines are very important, and for the first time, WHO unequivocally recommends using HPV as the primary screening test rather than VIA, which is visual inspection with acetic acid, or cytology, or pap smears, in screening and treatment approaches amongst both the general population of women and women living with HIV. So WHO has said that existing programs with quality assured cytology as a primary screening test should be continued until HPV testing is operational, but existing programs using VIA or visual inspection with acetic acid as the primary screening test should transition rapidly because of the inherent challenges with quality assurance with VIA. Now, there is a difference in recommendation for the general population and for women living with HIV, notably that for the general population, WHO suggests using an HPV primary screening test either with a triage test or without triage to prevent cervical cancer. So what this actually means is that with triage means that there's a second test applied for HPV positive women and that management is determined on that second test. So that can be cytology, it can be partial genotyping for HPV, it can even be VIA, and you can refer to the guidelines themselves for more details on the options. But the idea here is that we manage the number of HPV positives. So it's possible, for example, to triage before treatment. There is also, though, an option to do so-called HPV see and treat, which means all HPV positives are treated. And so countries and decision makers are encouraged to look at the options available and select the right options for a particular setting. For women living with HIV, it's recommended that a triaging process is used for HPV positive women before they're treated. Now, it's important to note that HPV screening now comes with different options as well for point of care testing and also for self-collection. And I think you'll hear more about that in the next speaker's presentation. But there are many ways to use these options, these algorithms, and to design them to be fit for purpose for the appropriate setting. The first time ever that the world has committed to eliminate a cancer. And this extraordinary initiative, launched in November 2020, of course, has never been more important for the world's women. I've tried, I suppose, to put a bit more detail around the key second pillar of elimination, which is HPV screening today. HPV is the most important decision to make with respect to screening. To screen with HPV means that women are provided with a high quality test that provides the best performance, and that's now been incorporated and recommended in the WHO guidelines. And I'd just like to finish by very quickly acknowledging the many collaborators who've contributed to the work I've shown today, particularly the members of the WHO Cervical Cancer Elimination Modelling Consortium, shown there at the top right. And finally, to acknowledge our wonderful team at the Daffodil Centre who've contributed also to all of the work that I've shown today. I'm looking forward to the panel discussion, and thank you very much again for the invitation to speak today. Goodbye.
We learned about the paradigm shift to higher performing HPV DNA test the experiences of Australia. We will hear next is Professor Marian Saville, Executive Director and Public Officer at the Australian Centre for Protection of Cervical Cancer. Professor Saville will share with us how culturally safe screening can meet the needs of disadvantaged groups who have higher propensity on poor cancer outcomes in Australia and New Zealand. Professor Saville is also focused on research and implementation projects, demonstrating that it's possible to deliver high quality, acceptable cancer screening in the range of um, poor settings or low resource settings, collaborating with investigators in Malaysia, leading to the establishment of the Rose Foundation. Let us now hear to Professor Marion Saville.
Hi, I'm Marion Saville. I've been asked to talk to you today about new tools to support cervical screening in resource-limited settings. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. At VCS Pathology, we are now carrying out reference laboratory functions. We've been a cervical screening focused laboratory since 1965, but that was broadly cytology. However, we are now an Australian HPV reference laboratory, having undertaken more than 700,000 HPV tests as part of our new HPV-based screening program, which commenced here in Australia on the 1st of December 2017. We were the first lab in Australia to be accredited for self-collection for HPV testing, and we've been involved in projects in a number of countries around the region. As you can see here, we have a variety of platforms in the lab, and the reason that we do that is we're very interested in the relative performance of the platforms and understanding what settings they're suitable for, and we're certainly very happy to provide our views of these platforms to countries and projects commencing with HPV testing. The first thing to understand about HPV testing is, unlike PCR for other pathogens, we're actually trying to detect a level of HPV present that's associated with a likelihood of CIN2+. And what this means is that the manufacturers have deliberately constructed cut points in what they call a positive test and what they call a negative test, such that low levels of HPV are not reported as positive, as they're very unlikely to be associated with CIN2+. This means, as you see in the left, if you undertake HPV tests on people from the general community who do not have a lesion across 4 different assays, you do get a spread of discordance, which can be disconcerting for people who are used to better concordance than that. However, by design, the concordance is really very good when you confine this similar analysis to those in whom HPV CIN2+ has been demonstrated, and the discordance largely melts away. So it's really important when you're thinking about which HPV test to use that any test that is clinically validated and has a claim for primary screening is likely to be appropriate, and considerations such as the throughput of the assay, the cost of the assay should be what you're thinking about once you've coned out anything that's not suitable. And of course, as always, if you go to WHO pre-qualification, you'll know that you're selecting a test that is suitable for screening and has been appropriately clinically validated. I want to use the rest of my time to talk really about the accuracy and acceptability of self-collection. This is a simple, cheap Copan flock swab, and we have found it to be remarkably effective in supporting HPV testing in a range of settings, both within Australia and more about that now. The 2018 meta-analysis from Arbon and colleagues really was a landmark for self-collection. And essentially what was found is, provided you look at assays based on polymerase chain reaction, testing with self-collection was as accurate as testing using clinically collected samples from the cervix. And here we are comparing a vaginal sample that's self-collected with a collected sample from the cervix. And it's important to know that the endpoint for the meta-analysis was CIN2 plus an AIS. And of course, these are the lesions we want to see in our screening program so that they can be treated before progression to cancer. In a second part of the same meta-analysis, you can read about the summary of studies looking at acceptability, and generally it was found that offering self-sampling kits was generally more effective in reaching underscreened people than sending invitations. So these are the receiver-operator curves from the first part of the meta-analysis, and here you see sensitivity on the y-axis plotted against the inverse of specificity. So being up here at the very top left-hand corner is absolutely optimal performance. And the first thing to note on the left is if we confine the analysis to some of the assays based on signal amplification, you can see that self-collection in purple underperformed, particularly with regards to sensitivity, clinician-collected samples. However, if you confine the analysis to PCR-based tests, the performance of self-collection and clinician collection is virtually indistinguishable, with a very minor difference there. And frankly, I've never seen such a fantastic looking receiver operator curve. And of course, we use these all the time to look at agreement of results between tests. So this is really very strong evidence of the accuracy and safety of self-collection as a screening tool. We needed to go further for regulatory reasons as much as anything else, and so we undertook a comparison of HPV detection set in a colposcopy clinic. This is our SCOPE study, self-collection versus practitioner-collected evaluation. And we had just over 3 paired samples taken from patients at colposcopy. Patients were asked to collect a sample prior to seeing the colposcopist. The colposcopist then also collected a sample from the cervix in the usual way on label, and these paired samples were sent to us in the lab. And we analysed these paired samples across 6 different assays. And to cut a very long story short, we found that self-collection was not statistically less sensitive than practitioner-collected sample when we used the practitioner-collected sample as the reference standard. It was marginally less specific than practitioner-collected, but we felt that this was intrinsic to the study design as the flock swab was used to collect the sample prior to the clinician-collected, and it was not able to randomise which sample was taken first. Importantly for us, as we're using this assay to screen people who reside in Central Australia and remote communities, we needed to validate the stability of the swab over a period of time. And while we initially did this for 14 days, we found we needed a longer time, particularly once our mail services struggled during the pandemic. So we've taken these data out now to 28 days. And what we did is we have got Copan flock swabs with known amounts of HPV. That's 3 times the limit of detection. So these are very low positive samples. And we placed them all at 50 degrees centigrade and greater than 90% relative humidity for 28 days, taking 2 swabs out every couple of days. And you see here plotted on the right, this is the cycle threshold, how many PCR cycles needed to be undertaken before the test turned positive. And this is the limit of detection. And with the cycle threshold, a higher number of cycles required means a lower viral load. So as you see here, there is a slow drift upwards, but within 28 days, still within the threshold for positivity. We've undertaken a number of acceptability studies, and in a variety of settings in our experience in Australia, and these are in Indigenous communities, in culturally diverse communities, and in a group providing services for women living on the streets, so very economically deprived. Across all 3 groups, among those who absolutely declined a pap smear, which was the standard test at the time, 86% gave us a swab. So this was not a survey, this was a behaviourally measured study. And of those in whom we detected HPV, 9 out of 10 undertook the recommended follow-up. And what we heard from the clinicians was it's a very different thing to persuade a woman to have a pelvic exam in the context of screening than it is in the context of a more investigation and diagnostic threshold. We undertook some qualitative evaluation, and you'll see there some very nice quotes that came from patients who had been putting off screening and were really relieved to have the opportunity to screen without needing a pelvic exam. And I must say this is very similar to other studies in other settings. This is a very common show targets. In our experience, women find it very easy to collect the sample provided they understand their anatomy, and this should be explained where needed. This is our instruction sheet. We're required to have words on it, but I think that it's possible to have these with very simple language and with the pictograms really pretty much explaining what needs to be done of collection. I'm very pleased to say that I'm talking to you in the days following a really landmark change to Australian policy, and following our transition to HPV-based screening. Our government announced in November last year that from July 1st, all the current restrictions on eligibility were removed. And so anyone eligible for screening in Australia, so 25 to 74 every 5 years, is able to choose between self-collected or clinician-collected screening test. And we see this very much as a choice to be made by the participant. Screening in Australia will continue to be made available in primary care, and that choice will be delivered by nurses and doctors. And we believe this brings great potential to address barriers and to really reach the people we haven't been able to reach. I'm going to finish by showing you this slide about Program Rose. This is a project that we're really proud of. It's a partnership with the University of Malaya, and we had a lot to do with getting this started. We gave guidance on self-collection and setting up a lab, and we've also supported this project with our e-health platform called CanScreen to support the follow-up of those who screen positive. This information is from a publication about a year ago, and I'm very pleased to tell you that the Rose Foundation is very close to ticking over 20,000 screened women. As you can see, overwhelmingly acceptable to Malaysian women, 95%. 1 in 4 women screened through Rose have never been screened before. And the Rose group are often running. We continue to provide support when they need it from us, technical support from the lab side and from the registry side. But they need it less and less. They're often running, and they've now introduced they've been to over 40 community locations across 13 states. They've got numerous healthcare providers trained in the Rose model, and over 100 community volunteers trained. So that is ongoing. That is a success of self-collection. And this is my final slide to just wrap it all up. Self-collection is accurate and therefore effective. The swabs are stable, and this can enable flexible delivery either in point of care or lab-based models. It overcomes cultural barriers, it facilitates scale up, and thereby can improve equity not only between countries and bring some of the countries in the region to screening more of the population, but also within countries as we are seeing in Australia. So I thank you very much for your time. Excuse me for not being there live. I'm on leave this week, and I really hope you have a great meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Marian Saville, for sharing the Australian experience on HPV DNA testing, especially in Indigenous communities and women living in the streets. So, okay, before we move to the next speaker, let's see how our viewers are able to keep to our speakers and their topics. So for our knowledge check, Note that there will be fun, healthy prizes for winners. So type in your answers on Zoom and also on Facebook. Okay, here we go. We have 2 questions. The first question is, so type in your comment on Zoom and on Facebook. How many % sensitivity is HPV DNA screening test? How many % sensitivity is HPV DNA screening test? So it's quite cerebral question. It's a cerebral question. So how many % sensitivity is HPV DNA screening test? So that's the first question. And then also our second question is, I think this is quite easy. What are the 2 common human papillomaviruses that cause cervical cancer? Okay, so what are the 2 common human papillomaviruses that cause cervical cancer? Type in your questions on Zoom or on Facebook. Okay, are we good? Okay, up next, we have Dr. Veronica Rice from Jipaigo Women's Cancer Senior Technical Advisor and Technical Lead for the Success Project. Dr. Rice will be talking about the support to lower middle income countries for the shift, exhibiting Jipaigo's effort to support the expansion and sustainability of cervical cancer prevention technologies in lower and middle income countries, and identify challenges and success factors for advancing cervical cancer prevention and route to elimination. Everyone, let's welcome Dr. Veronica Rice.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thanks for this opportunity to present the Jipaigo and the success effort to support low and middle-income countries for the introduction of new technology to advance cervical cancer prevention. So the objective of this session is to share our experiences supporting countries for the expansion of new technology for cervical cancer prevention, and identify challenges and the success factors in this process. So we know that the reality in many low resources seats, the need is great and the resources are limited. So we know that there are few healthy workers, poor work condition, weak perceived education, dysfunctional management system. And the cervical cancer, there are a lot of inequity around this disease. So most women that die by cervical cancer are from low and middle-income countries where the access to vaccination, screening, and treatment are very low. And also women living with HIV are in the most vulnerable condition. Jipaigo is supporting the WHO strategy toward the elimination and the supporting country, low and middle-income country, for the achievement of the proposed target in 90% Jipaigo is a non-profit organization affiliated to Johns Hopkins University. We have 50 years of experience working in global health, and we are currently in around 14 countries. And the Jipaigo vision for the women's cancer is a world where an integrated and coordinated response improving downstage of cancer and end is preventable death for women's cancer. So we have been working in several countries, and currently we are in these 12 countries. And we have been investing in advocacy and the resource mobilization, availability of equipment and supply, straighten policy and the training system, and the awareness and the demand creation, access to quality and the integrated service delivery, and the straighten M&E system. So Jipaigo has been investing and helping countries to update or develop tools for the introduction of new technology. So we have been supporting the development of training material, IC material, M&E tools, and the SOP, quality standards for cervical cancer prevention, including these new technologies. So this is the status of the countries supported by Jipaigo. They are moving from the screen with VIA and the cytology and treatment with the cryotherapy to the introduction of the thermoablation and the HPV test. And also we have been focused on the integration of cervical cancer prevention into other sexual and reproductive health and the HIV service. Now I'm gonna talk a bit about the experience of the success project. Is the Scale Up Cervical Cancer Elimination with a secondary prevention strategy. This is a project funded by UNITAID from 2019 to November 2023. So have been focused in 4 countries, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Guatemala, and the Philippines, and they have a regional influence. So the tools and the experience from this country can be useful for other countries in the region. So the target from this project is to screen 175,000 women with HPV tests and treat. And we have targeted per countries. In this project, we have been supporting the introduction of new technology such as the HPV test and thermoablation, but also mHealth for patient navigation, e-learning tools for the delivery of the hybrid training, the self-collection and the intervention at the community level. So this is the result so far from the success project. From June last year to April this year, we managed to screen 24,210 women with HPV testing. 80% of these screening were with self-sampling. And we had 3,302 positive cases, and they managed to treat 503. We use a different algorithm. Some areas or countries have been using screen and treat all HPV positive women, and the other areas or countries have been using screen, triage, and treat. So in terms of the HPV test, we have been confirming that it is a high quality test with potential for improving the coverage via self-collection. So this is one experience in Philippines in March this year. This is a community intervention activity with many women came, health education. We had individual counseling, they register, and they managed to collect the sample in these stamps. So in this day, we managed to screen many women in one day. So for treatment about thermal ablation, we have been training people, and our experience has been shown that thermal ablation is really an easy to learn and perform treatment with highly acceptability by clients and providers. And we have been promoted task shifting. So training medical doctors, but also nurse and midwife has been able to deliver this treatment. For leads, there is no news about leads. It is a treatment that we have been promoted the last few years. But currently we have been procured this portable electrosurgical device, which makes easy to bring the treatment more closer to the women. So some steps that we consider critical for the introduction of new technology are the preparation, so the readiness to start implementation, building the capacity, work for the expansion, and ensure the sustainability. So key challenges in this process are countries are prioritizing COVID response in the last few years, which makes some challenge for the expansion of the intervention. But we managed to navigate, and even in this context, limited funds and the resources for cervical cancer prevention, ensure effective and timely procurement and importation is another challenge. Concern about the lab capacity to absorb HPV testing demand, ensure patient navigation from screening to treatment, and ensure quality training, mentorship, and the M&E. Some success factors that I would like to highlight here is the importance of the government commitment and the ownership. It's key to sustainability, enable environment, community engagement and the demand creation, coordination and partnership, be flexible and creative and embrace innovative solution, and recognize and celebrate effort. So this year, this is some GPIGO resources that are able to countries and support this effort. And I'd like to end this presentation say that we have been promoting women-centered care. It is important to listen to the women and help them when they need it most. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Veronica Rice, for that very insightful presentation and sharing the challenges and success factors for advancing cervical cancer prevention and route to elimination, especially the importance of community engagement and partnership and helping women when they are most in need. So for the fun quiz, let's see. What is this? So this is the question. What is the highly acceptable treatment that Dr. Rice mentioned for cervical cancer? What is the highly acceptable treatment that Dr. Rice mentioned in her presentation for cervical cancer? So type in your answers on Zoom and also on Facebook comments page. So time really flies so fast, and we hope that you're enjoying the fun quiz this afternoon. If you're having fun, type 1 in the comment section. Type 1 in the comment section. If you think that the topics of the webinar will or is giving you valuable information, type 2 in the comment section. Type 1 if you're enjoying. Type 2 if you think that the webinar is giving you valuable information. Type 2 in the comment section. This afternoon has been very informative, and we are confident and all excited with the developments and hoping, of course, that we see the same in the Philippines. We are sure that you've been wanting to ask questions, or actually we received questions already posted on Zoom. And so we will be opening the floor now for a Q&A portion. So to help us answer the questions, we are privileged to have with us live Dr. Veronica Rice. So we welcome Dr. Veronica Rice this afternoon. However, there are, I think, some questions that are relevant to DOH. Oh, I am about vaccination, Dr. Rice. I'm not sure if, but I think this will be relevant also. There's a question here from Miss Olivar. Till what age can we provide cervical cancer vaccine? Oh, it's not part of the presentation of Dr. Rice. I think it's more on the success project and how success can be.
Stella.
Yes, Dr. Rice.
Thank you very much. Even this is not a question related to my presentation, but what I can say about age for the vaccination, the recommendation from WHO is to prioritize girls from 9 to 14 years old. So this is the priority age for the vaccination.
Thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Rice. Yes, that is very, very informative, especially we're translating the questions because they are in Filipino. And then there's another question here. Okay, is it possible for the government to also provide training on HPV DNA? Oh, this is actually a question for the government, but if Dr. Rice can say like the plan of JPIGO to support the government, perhaps that would be very much appreciated. Dr. Rice?
Yeah, thank you again for this question. And this is really a very important question because JPIGO has been supporting government and work to ensure sustainability. So it's really critical that the government take the leadership on all of this process for the update of norms, guidelines, curriculum for training. And we have been working together and you work with the government personnel to ensure the quality training of providers and also the necessary supportive supervision, mentorship, and the monitoring the evaluation. So yes, the government should take this responsibility of supporting the training of people and also use the existing training platform to ensure the sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Veronica. I understand, although there are questions here whether a 30-year-old can still receive a cervical cancer vaccine. I think you have experience also, JPIGO has experience in terms of vaccination in other countries. So perhaps you can share that information, Dr. Rice.
Yeah.
If, for example, I'm 30 years old and I would like to be vaccinated.
Yeah. The main effectiveness of the vaccine is when we can vaccinate one woman before she gets the HPV infection. So vaccinate the women in an early age is an opportunity to get the most effectiveness of the vaccination. However, if country has the condition and can support the vaccination beyond the priority age, we can still have some effectiveness. But especially for low and mid-income countries where the resources very limited, the recommendation is to keep and prioritize the age where we know that we can have the most effectiveness of the vaccination. Again,
repeat, the priority age should be 9 to 14 years old. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Veronica. So those are the questions that we received from the audience at this point in time. Thank you for being with us. If we may ask you, Dr. Rice, do you have any other information that you would like to share to our viewers for this afternoon in the Philippines? I understand it's early morning your side. Thank you.
No, in fact, I'd like to thank you again for the WHO and for the Philippines DOH for this initiative. What I really believe that is important for everyone. So I believe that work for disseminate evidence and advocate for the implementation of the global strategy for the elimination is key to advance cervical cancer prevention in the road to the elimination. So thank you very much for this initiative.
Thank you, Dr. Veronica, for attending live here in the Philippines. So we understand you're on the other side of the world, and we appreciate your presence so much. So thank you once again, Dr. Rice. We hope to see you in the Philippines.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye. And I hope you enjoyed our quick talk with Dr. Veronica. With so many things that happened this afternoon, it's already past 5 p.m. It's time to have our mental health break. So sit back and relax. We'll catch you again later. Thank you everyone. Please stand by. Thank you.
Hi, I am Josefina M. De La Cruz. I am a cervical cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 2001. I was 40 years old then and at the prime of my career. For a few months prior to my regular checkup, I got symptoms like painful menstrual periods that take as long as 9 to 10 days, spotting and bleeding after intercourse, and foul discharge, foul odor discharge. Then, upon checkup and transvaginal ultrasound, it was revealed that I have myoma and needs further treatment. I decided to have a second opinion on that. And it was there when Dr. Llave revealed to me that I have cervical cancer stage 1B2. At that time, it seems to me that it was a death sentence. But the good Dr. Llave assured me that there is cure in that. So I immediately underwent radical hysterectomy, followed by 6 sessions of chemotherapy, uh, 26 sessions of radiation therapy, and 72 hours of brachytherapy. It was indeed a very difficult fight of my life, considering that I have 4 young children at that time. But my faith in God has sustained me in the fight against cervical cancer. The thought of your dying is really very painful as a mother. I was terribly afraid, remembering that my mother died of the same disease. I witnessed all her sufferings until her last breath. So, all I can do was to plead to God to spare my 2 daughters. They should not die of cervical cancer like my mother, and I might also die just like her. It was a heaven sent news when one day I went to the university library and I found this advertisement in the newspaper, which I secretly got, saying that there is new vaccine for cervical cancer. And it was saying that to prevent cervical cancer or to stop the cause of this cancer, which they say is human papilloma virus. So I immediately did some research on that until Dr. Aliave introduced me this vaccine. And it was all really blessing that she made it possible for my 2 daughters to receive the vaccines for free. Since then, I've got my peace of mind that my daughters will not suffer as I had and will not die of cervical cancer. So I went out in the open, despite the stigma, despite the fear, because I'm a professor. And people would be thinking if you have cervical cancer, you are an indecent woman. But still, I went out of my way to tell the women out there that they should not die of cervical cancer. I really had my fight. I was so blessed. God gave me this second lease of life. I thought I was 40 then when I was diagnosed. I thought in few years, just like my mother who fought for only 3 years. I thought I would die then. But indeed, God blessed me with so much blessing of life that I was able to conquer the pain. I was able to take a new stand in life. Now I am free of cervical cancer. I am now a 21 years survivor of cervical cancer. Now I just would like to tell all women out there, don't be afraid. Have your checkup, see your doctor the best possible time earlier to avoid this disease. Be vaccinated because this disease has already a cure. This can be prevented. So you have to act now. Thank you.
Wow, that was a powerful testimony. Professor Josephine, you are indeed a woman of courage. You're such an inspiration. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. Another exciting part of this afternoon's webinar is a panel discussion. We have Dr. Ricky Lu joining us this afternoon as our moderator. Dr. Lu invested in laying the groundwork for countries to sooner achieve a future free from cervical cancer. He is the senior advisor of the Success Project at JPIGO headquarters in the US and a co-investigator of Cryopop clinical trial in India and in the Philippines. Dr. Lu is based in the United States, so he is in the other side of the world. Let me now give the floor to Dr. Ricky Lu as he introduces our panelists for this afternoon. Welcome, Dr. Lu.
Oh, thank you so much, Stella, for that warm introduction. So, everyone, I see a very active chat session with lots of questions and comments. And also, Stella, that was quite fun to have those questions that you have been peppering the presentations, the webinar, all through since we started earlier today. So, I'd like to welcome everyone to the session on the country situation and cervical cancer elimination strategies in Malaysia and in the Philippines. In this session, we will be discussing their experiences on cervical cancer elimination programs, particularly when it comes to the roadmap, best practices, and challenges in the effort to prevent cervical cancer, particularly through vaccination and screening, including reaching vulnerable populations. Now, earlier today, when we were listening into Australia from Professor Karen Canfell as well as Professor Marion Saville, we heard about the Project Rose program that was being implemented in Malaysia. I'm happy to introduce, to start this introduction by saying that we will be hearing first from Dr. Wu Yin Ling, who is the lead investigator and the implementer in Malaysia. So she is from the University of Malaya, and she will be sharing with us Malaysia's elimination effort. Now, Professor Ling is not with us today, but however, she has sent in her recorded presentation. So without much ado, I'd like to ask the presentation to be shown after I introduce the next speaker also, which is Dr. Clarito Cairo, who will be sharing the Philippines experience on rolling out cervical cancer prevention, primarily or particularly in transitioning the effort from cytology and VIA to the use of high precision tests, HPV testing, and the introduction of thermal ablation into the treatment options for women in the Philippines. So we have two great presentations to hear today. And so without much ado, let me start with Professor Ling's presentation.
This opportunity to share from a Malaysian's perspective. I'm glad to be here with friends, and I think we bring together different perspectives. For me personally, I see the elimination strategy from the lens of a clinician, a volunteer that works with community, and also as part of a policymaker, as I belong to a task force for cervical cancer elimination led by the Ministry of Health. Just briefly to share about Malaysia, we are quite a diverse society of 32 million. We have a male to female ratio of about 1:1, and we come from a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society. Now this is important because it means that whatever strategy we use, we have to target it specifically to be culturally sensitive. We are classified as a middle income country, and on the Human Development Index, we are ranked 57. So like many countries, we have signed on, Malaysia has signed on to the elimination targets, which is 90% of girls to be vaccinated, 70% of women to be screened with a high precision test, and to be treated appropriately. Where are we in Malaysia? So we are fortunate to have had a very effective vaccination program since 2010. Our 13-year-old girls are offered a free government paid for program in their schools, and we've achieved more than 80% coverage since 2010. Over the last few years, couple of years, just like many of our neighboring countries, we've lagged behind in our school-based program because of the pandemic. However, the Ministry of Health is now looking at a catch-up program and to ensure that we are able to offer the vaccines again to school-going children. But in terms of cervical screening, despite a free service in Ministry of Health clinics since 1969, women have been able to walk in to any clinics to have a pap smear, but most just do it once or twice in their lifetime postnatally. And we don't have a call and recall system, although that has been tried. So there must be something inherent in our culture that we have not adopted a regular screening by routine cytology. So pap smears or cervical screening in the past has also been excluded in many health screening packages. So are we on track then to achieve the elimination target? I'm pleased to inform you that while we have a very good vaccination program, we are now also moving towards a revived, renewed and reformed screening strategy. With multi-stakeholder involvement, the Ministry of Health have come up with new guidelines incorporating HPV testing. This guideline also allows for women to do self-sampling or testing. So we've had that since 2019, and the idea is to have a phased approach. What is really great is that our Ministry of Health and our government has had the political will to do this, and we've come up with an action plan which does include or aim for the WHO strategies to be implemented in Malaysia. Now, political will is one thing, but rolling it on the ground come with different challenges which requires us to work together to address them. So one of the main questions the communities or ministries of finance will ask is this test cost effective? Do we have to have increased budget to be included in this? And Karen has shared maybe perhaps in the other sessions that this is an intervention that's not only cost effective, it is cost saving. And it's not just in upper income countries. The cost saving measures also work well in lower middle income countries, and we've modeled that for Malaysia, and it is the same. It is cost effective. So we've had political commitment, we've got good vaccination programs. So what are the new concepts or challenges that need to be accepted by healthcare professionals and the public to ensure that screening can be rolled out effectively in an accelerated fashion and efficiently? We now need to really transmit the message that HPV testing is now the recommended primary screening tool. I've spoken to many healthcare professionals and there's still some doubt. We need to actually communicate the message that pap smears are not better than HPV testing and its sensitivity is not as good, and for a woman, she needs fewer tests in her lifetime. To adopt new screening methods or any new test, your messaging to the public needs to be very good and acceptable. In terms of HPV testing, I think we need to move away from the messaging that it's a sexually transmitted disease, because that will mean that in people's mind, that would mean that they would have to have contact tracing or antibiotics. We need to share that HPV infection is common and that most men and women will have it once in their lifetime, and therefore destigmatize a woman with HPV positive test results. Now this may seem easy, but it's actually tougher because over the years we've built up a messaging that may not be that helpful. Third and most important thing which I feel is that we must be ready to accept self-sampling. We need to shift the idea or the understanding that screening needs to be done in a hospital. With self-sampling, it's been shown to be effective, to be reliable if a woman does it herself, compared to a clinically acquired specimen if it's using the right HPV testing platform. Now, this allows screening to be scalable, done in the community, and I think it's a model that will help accelerate the achievement of the elimination targets. So I'd like to end by saying this, and we can have a discussion. The elimination targets, not just in Malaysia, but in our region, needs to be achieved through sustainable and adaptable partnerships. I've learned a lot from our friends in the region, particularly from the Australian experience. And I think when you talk about reaching vulnerable groups, such as women living with HIV, we need to have a closer working relationship with ID physicians. Women living with HIV won't come out to see a gynecologist or other doctors. They're more comfortable with their primary caregivers. So we with HPV self-testing being a modality that's available, we need to consider new methods of collaboration and screening. Thank you very much.
Well, that was quite an amazing insight into Malaysia's experience. I just heard an update from our team back here that Professor Ling is going to be joining us later in this session. And so for those of us who have questions about the effort in Malaysia, particularly when it comes to rolling out screening using HPV testing, we're going to have a question and answer after the next presentation. So, but before I go to the next presentation, what are some of the 4 takeaways that I've been able to glean from her presentation? One was I was amazed at the level of political commitment that is critical to the success of their program, and which I hope we're going to be hearing also from Doc Lar when he does his presentation later after this takeaways. The second message that I heard was about that it's not only about testing that is important, which is from the provider perspective, but it's also important for providers and women to understand that there may be stigma associated with the result. And so we ought to be able to help, we as providers, we ought to be able to help women understand and destigmatize HPV as well as cervical cancer. And we have heard, and that effort is going on. We've heard from Professor De La Cruz earlier today when she spoke about her experience with surviving cervical cancer. The third message I heard was about self sampling, which is critical in getting women to be screened on a timely basis. And last but not the least, it's not only about the government and about providers that we need to have an all of society approach to defeating cervical cancer. So, without much ado, I'd like to ask our next presenter, Doc Clarito Cairo, who is the program manager for the cancer effort in the Philippines. He is a program manager at the Philippine Department of Health. So, Doc Cairo, are you ready?
Yes, Doc, I'm ready. Thank you. Let me share my screen. Slides. Okay. I'm sorry about that. So it's being uploaded now. Okay. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'll be talking about the Philippine situation on cervical cancer and our elimination strategies. So this was partly mentioned by Dr. Ilbawi earlier. So for the primary prevention, our subnational HPV vaccination program started in 2016, and based on in 2020, our target population of 9 to 14 school age girls, um, fewer than 1 in 10 girls have received their final HPV vaccination dose. And for the secondary prevention, our screening using the VIA, or the visual inspection of the cervix using acetic acid, which started in 2014. So for the last 5 years, fewer than 1 in 10 women have been screened for cervical cancer. And for the treatment and supportive care, um, currently the national guidelines on cervical cancer management is being developed. Hopefully, before the year ends, it will be out in the country. And then for the cancer diagnosis and treatment services, they're all generally available. And however, the number of radiotherapy and brachytherapy units is still limited, and the number of medical staff, including the radiation oncologists, medical physicists, and others, are still concentrated in highly urbanized cities. So usually they are scarce in rural areas. And lastly, the palliative care for our cancer patients is being provided only in some areas. It's not yet incorporated or integrated in our primary care. So, for some quick facts on the cervical cancer in the Philippines, our incidence per 100,000 women is 14.5, and the women at risk at 35.6 million. Our population as of 2022 is at 110 million, and our cervical cancer new cases at 7,190, and the deaths are at 3,100. And the predominant strains of HPV among Filipino women are HPV 16 and 18, and almost 11 Filipino women die of cervical cancer daily, and it's the second most common woman cancer next to breast cancer, and cervical cancer is the leading cause of death among women living with HIV. So, as they say, all is well that begins well. Fortunately, the Philippines is one of the pilot countries of scale up cervical cancer elimination with secondary prevention strategy or success project. It is a collaboration between Expertise France, JAPIGO, UICC, and other development partners. And we are committed to uh, have 50,000 women plus around 6,900 women living with HIV to be enrolled in this project. So, together with Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and Guatemala. And here is the sample poster for our success project. This is provided in one of the access sites. And there's the logo of the Expertise France, Japago, and of course the DOH and the hospital. And it promotes the use of HPV DNA tests among 30 to 49 women. And then with addition of 50 to 65 age for those with no history of cervical cancer screening. So we will be using the self collection or the healthcare provider will be doing the test. So for the acceleration plan towards elimination, we have this vision, cervical cancer free Philippines, and we have the same goal, below 4 cases of cervical cancer per 100,000 women. And for that 90-70-90, in the 90% of girls fully vaccinated with HPV vaccine by 15 years of age, we included the single dose. It will definitely be a big help for us, being a low and middle income country, to have the single dose HPV vaccination. It's currently undergoing a health technology assessment. And for the 70% of women screened with an HPV test at 30 and 49. So it's not just 35 to 45. So we expanded it to 30 to 49. And 90% of women screened positive received treatment for precancerous lesion using the thermal ablation. Before we use cryotherapy, and now we are going to use thermal ablation, and then or invasive cancer using the four modalities of treatment, including the systemic therapy, which we launched last year, the Cancer and Supportive Palliative Medicine Access Program. So we're giving free medicines for our patients with invasive cervical cancer. And our goal is to reduce the mortality from cervical cancer by 30% by 2030. So here's the timeline for our cervical cancer elimination. For phase one, from 2021, last year, to 2024, we have the Cancer and Supportive Palliative Medicines Access Program, which we are giving free medicines to our patients, regardless of status. And we are currently implementing the Success Project. It will end July 2023, but we plan, of course, to continue and to sustain it. And we're going to institutionalize the screen and treat approach using HPV DNA tests and thermal ablation. And we're going to expand the HPV vaccination, hopefully with a positive recommendation from our HTA Council using the single dose. And of course, we are going to strengthen our healthy lifestyle program. We termed it as Todo Pito, or the 7 healthy habits. And for the next phase, 2025 to 2027, we need to scale up the screen and treat approach, and we need to expand further the HPV vaccination, single dose, and the CSP map, or the Cancer and Supportive Palliative Medicines Access Program. And lastly, for the third phase, 2028 to 2030, uh, I think we are on track with achieving the 2030 targets of cervical cancer elimination, 90-70-90. Fingers crossed. I think this is my last slide. Thanks very much. You're on mute, Doc Ricky.
Thank you so much, Doc Cairo. That was an amazing set of information from the Philippines. So, but before we go into the question and answer portion of this panel discussion, let me just state a couple of takeaways that I've heard from you. One is it's quite amazing to hear that the Philippine Department of Health is collaborating and as a partner. And I heard also that it is leading the arm of the success project in the
Let me
Philippines,
just state a
particularly.
couple of takeaways that I've heard.
We have a echo. Anyway, so leading the HPV introduction, HPV screening introduction in the Philippines, as well as increasing access to thermal ablation in the Philippines. So congratulations on that one. So the second one was that there is a three-phase plan that will extend from now until 2030. And that part of the plan is actually to sustain the HPV testing and thermal ablation screen and treat approach so that particularly the DOH, the Philippines, will be able to reach or accelerate its elimination effort by 2030. And the last but not the least, the information that I got, the takeaway is the fact that the Philippines will be signing on to secure the guidelines for a one-dose HPV and improve the vaccination rates in the Philippines. So with that one, thank you so much, Cairo, for elaborating further on the Philippine plans to eliminate cervical cancer. So I have with us a Professor Ling, Professor Ling from the University of Malaya. Thank you so much. Earlier today, earlier in the session, we've heard your presentations. That was quite amazing to hear Malaysia's experience in its effort towards eliminating cervical cancer in Malaysia. And so I think right now we have a couple of questions that have been posed by the audience. And I'd like to start with a question to Professor Ling. So this is a question that came to us by way of uh, an audience who mentioned that she has been to Malaysia a couple of times and that she knows that in Malaysia there are more than 7 cultures. And her question, there are two questions in that she posed. One was, what has been your experience when it comes to reaching these different cultures? And if you have any resistance from these different population groups, how have you addressed those resistance? And then her second question is that because in the Philippines, we have a number of overseas contract workers who are working in Malaysia, she's also asking the question, if foreigners who are in Malaysia, how do they get screening and if the screening is free? So with that one, I'll hand it over to you, Professor Ling, and welcome to this panel.
Thank you, Ricky. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
So the resistance, whichever culture it is, there is this issue of stigma. I think something that we are trying to deal with quite actively. I think there was a skepticism about women being able to do their own self swab, but certainly on the ground we've not had that issue much at all. I think it's important, whether it's in Philippines or anywhere else, that if the option of a healthcare professional and of self-sampling must be made available, because some women are really scared to do self-sampling themselves. But in our experience of as a charity going out to more than 20,000 women, very few are scared or have hurt themselves, and the invalid rates are very low. What is the resistance? The resistance mainly is the fear of being labeled having a sexually transmitted disease, the fear of the cost that would be associated with an abnormal screen, and the unknown. I think the ones with who are not so literate are fearful because once you have an abnormal screen, you walk into a hospital, it may be associated with significant cost. So I think, Clarito, your idea of a thermal ablation of screen and treat may be acceptable to many women. But for some other women, a conventional colposcopy, hospital lets maybe useful. Second thing is for foreigners. Currently, for foreigners, they still don't fall into our national subsidized program as yet. So they have to do it in the private laboratories or the private facilities or university teaching hospitals such as ours. So, of course, the cost will be very variable.
Oh, thank you so much, Professor Ling. That was quite interesting to hear that everyone who is in Malaysia, every woman is covered for screening for cervical cancer. So there is another question, and this one is directed to Dr. Cairo, which is a question on vaccination. How can you convince parents to get their 9 to 14-year-old vaccinated when cancer is something that they don't even wish to speak about?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question, Dr. Ricky. So the vaccine hesitancy problem in the Philippines is really huge. That's primarily we're going to address. So we need to strengthen our advocacy campaign regarding the benefits of HPV vaccination. So it's anti-cancer primarily, and we need to address the stigma associated with cancer and associated with HPV infection. So as I mentioned earlier, we will strengthen the Todo Pito, and part of Todo Pito is HPV vaccination to prevent cervical cancer. So we are going to collaborate with our partners, our media partners, including social media influencers. They are very effective in this time of social media. I mean, the popularity of social media. So we need to partner with them too. Thank
Yeah,
you.
there is, thank you, Doc Cairo. There is a follow up question. And to just clarify, they're asking about if there is any plan to use social media, I guess, to promote vaccination, particularly for the ages 9 to 14. And maybe you can also talk about the use of social media to promote screening among eligible women in the Philippines.
Absolutely. We are going to optimize the use of social media. You see, it has a big role in the election. So we need to use it also for the promotion of vaccination and screening for cervical cancer.
Okay, well, thank you so much with that one, Doc Cairo. And just we have one burning last question that's directed to Professor Ling, and this relates to one. If you can talk, the question is about the treatment for cervical dysplasia, particularly when it comes to women who test HPV positive after either self sampling or provider collected samples.
So, if as one of the most important thing we must remember is screening doesn't save lives, right? It is the follow up that really matters. That is critical. So, if we screen with no backup plan for follow up, then we are wasting money. One of the programs that Ricky you talked about is Program Rose,
Mhm.
where really a lot of our effort is spent on a call center. And what
Mm.
we do is we talk to women and explain. We spend a lot of time explaining to them what the test involves, and then we write referral letters for them. We tell them where to go. We use WhatsApp to send them little videos on what colposcopy is about. The whole idea is to remove fear. I think many people are frightened to go to hospitals, and many people are frightened what it involves because it's their ability to have children or cancer treatment. And as a clinician, one of the things that we use as a language, now we talk about removing the stigma. One of the things that I try to do in my clinic is not to use the word pre-cancer or cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. You hear neoplasia, you think cancer. Pre-cancer is cancer. So what we do is we say there's some thickened skin. If you don't treat, it may become cancer. Now that's language that many people understand. So I think in terms of treatment, using the right language to explain to patients so that they are not scared, helping them to navigate to a treatment center is critical.
Well, thank you so much for that one. And I'm glad that you actually emphasized the part about follow up and making sure that when we recall them, that they actually are reassured around receiving treatment. So I guess I'm receiving a warning that we are close to the end, and we still have Stella to do a recap for the day's session and to prepare us for tomorrow. So thank you so much, Professor Ling, and thank you, Dr. Cairo, for taking the time to share with us the Philippines and Malaysia's experience in accelerating the movement towards eliminating cervical cancer. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Ricky Lu, for facilitating that very comprehensive and informative panel discussion and Q&A. Now, let's have a recap of what happened this afternoon. Earlier, Dr. Ilbawi mentioned about the 90-70-90 targets, where 90% of girls should be fully vaccinated before the age of 15. And then 70% of women should be screened and then of course 90% should be treated. Out of the 70%, if they were positive for HPVs during the HPV DNA testing or any form of screening for cervical cancer, they should be receiving treatment and care. Professor Marian Saville talked about the pooled sensitivity and specificity of HPV DNA screening test compared to pap smear or VIA, which is the two most common methods of screening done in the healthcare facilities. Professor Karen Canfell offers strategies and a paradigm shift to high-performing HPV DNA testing, citing Sentinel experiences with using the Australian model. Dr. Veronica Rice, on the other hand, mentioned the different possible treatments for cervical cancer patients, stating as well the cervical thermal ablation is a highly acceptable type of treatment. In the panel discussion, we heard Dr. Gu Yin Ling and Dr. Clarito Cairo sharing the experiences of their countries, Malaysia and Philippines, and it was truly exciting to have learned that countries' experiences in cervical cancer elimination programs to cover initial cervical cancer screening and then eventually covering vulnerable populations and vaccination coverage, roadmap, best practices and challenges experienced during the run of cervical cancer programs in their respective countries. In Malaysia, Dr. Ling mentioned that the ratio for male to female is 1:1 and their vaccination rate is 80%. While they have a very good vaccination program, they are moving to a revived, renewed, reformed strategy, allowing women to do self-collection for cervical cancer screening. But the main question by the government is if HPV DNA test is cost effective. And they have given evidence that it's not only cost effective, it is cost saving as well. So I have 5 takeaways. Dr. Ricky mentioned about his 4 takeaways. I have 5 takeaways. That communication is very important. So it's important to communicate that pap smear is not as better for cervical cancer screening. Using HPV DNA testing would require women to have been tested fewer in their lifetime. So as mentioned by the Malaysian experience, it is also cost saving. The importance of addressing stigma and discrimination and skepticism of self-collection. So it is recommended that women will be provided options, whether at the time of self-collection, there will be an option also for healthcare practitioner assisted collection. Women with HIV would not come out, considering, let's consider, it is highlighted that we need to consider new collaborations in screening, especially at the primary care level. Additionally, screening does not save lives. Follow-up for treatment is the heart of the matter. We also need to communicate well that using pre-cancer terminology can be realigned to like a thickening of a cell or a portion in the woman's reproductive organ, so that if we don't treat that what do you call that thickening, it will become cancer. So it's important to use the right language and helping women to navigate to treatment centers is very critical. Philippines aims to scale up interventions being offered through the Success Project, and Philippines is also providing free medicines to help achieve the goals, the 2030 goals of cervical cancer elimination. So we had a lot this afternoon, but before we end, we will be announcing the winners for the fun quiz. So this is, I think, the moment you've been waiting for. So the winners will be receiving fun, healthy food packs. Yeah, okay, so our winners are, so we have how many winners for? The first winner is Mareha Lu Peñaflor, who gave the most complete answer. So 90% of girls should be fully vaccinated, 70% of women screened. So the question is, what is the meaning of 90-70-90 targets? So she answered quite very clearly. So Mareha Lu Peñaflor is our winner for question number 1. For question number 2, the most common human papilloma viruses that cause cervical cancer, our winner is Miss Rochelle Corsino. Message our tech team. So she answered HPV 16 and 18. So for the next question about how sensitive is HPV DNA testing, we have a winner, Lucy Agiman. She answered 98%. So Lucy Agiman is our winner for question number 3. And our final winner, question number 4, what is the treatment that our presenter provided earlier? So it's cervical thermal ablation. Our winner is Nadina Pasqua. Hi, Nadina Pasqua. You are our winner. So, okay. So, yeah, that's so exciting. Oh, yeah. So, before we end the session for this afternoon, so we will all see you again tomorrow, same time, same mode of how you were able to join the webinar this afternoon, we'll have a photo op for all the speakers up on the screen, please. I would like to request all our speakers, moderators, panelists to join us during the photo op. Dr. Cairo, Dr. Lu, I hope Dr. Ling is also still with us this afternoon. It's just us. I think Dr. Ling is no longer with us. I think so. We're good. Just the three of us. Okay. Okay. So yeah, give your best smile. Who will capture? Are we good? Are we good? Okay, we're good. We're good. So thank you, Dr. Ricky Lu, Dr. Cairo. Yeah. So we hope to see you again tomorrow for the day 2 of the webinar. So on behalf of all the participants and the project team, DOH and WHO, we would like to thank all our speakers, panelists, and moderators for sharing their knowledge with us for the first day of our cervical cancer webinar series with the theme, A Paradigm Shift in Cervical Cancer Care and Route to Elimination. So see you again tomorrow for day 2. This has been Stella Osorio, Technical Coordinator of WHO Philippines, signing off. Mabuhay!